Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? Obedient group here this morning. Well, I think we had a fabulous first day yesterday, and I know we're in for another one today. And before kicking off with Justice Carney, we're honored to have a UAF official here to greet us and welcome us to campus. Acting Chancellor Shrega was scheduled to be here, but he's pretty severely under the weather. But we are happy to have Owen Guthrie, who's the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Enrollment, a longtime Fairbanksan, and I understand a bit of a history buff. He's going to offer a greeting, and then I'll turn over the floor to Senate President Gary Stevens to introduce our keynote event. So with that, Owen, if you wouldn't mind joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Am I okay? Can you hear me all right? It's hard up here. Great. So yesterday afternoon, I got this knock on my door and said, hey, tomorrow morning, there's a history group on campus, and can you give them a little welcome comment? And my mind immediately went to, oh, it's the Fairbanks Historical Society. Sure, I can do that, no problem. I know all those, so there's like half a dozen folks there, no problem. And then, but send me the details and I'll be there. Just tell me where. I didn't know where to go. And last night was a volleyball game. We won, by the way. UF won. We're 12-1. Yeah, go Nooks. At 8:30, I was like, I still don't really know where this thing is. I texted, hey, where is this thing? And oh, here's the Google Doc with all the information in it. Oh, it's gonna be 100+ people there. And oh, okay, great. Imagine my surprise. It's the Alaska Historical Society. It is such a pleasure and honor to be here. History is my, if I had to pick one academic discipline that would be my far and away favorite, it is history. We share that in common. So I'm very glad you're here. I understand you've had some good meetings already and are going to hopefully have a wonderful Friday. It's kind of grim out there today, which is interesting, I think. So at UF, when we gather in a large gathering like this, we like to say a little land acknowledgement. We live and reside on the Alaska Native Nation, land of the Alaska Native Nations. In Fairbanks, that's the lands of the Lower Tanana, the Dene people of the Lower Tanana. And we're very honored to share in that heritage, that history. So my love of history, I was thinking about that last night after 8:30, like, why do I love history? And maybe you can take a moment to ask yourself the same question for me. In fact, with some of my managers, I asked this question, a little exercise called 5 whys. And you ask yourself, why this thing? And then you give yourself an answer and you say, okay, why that thing? And you keep drilling down. And usually within 3 or 4, like the tears start to well up and you start to choke up because there's really deep reasons why we do the things we do, why we like the things we do. For me, I think if I get down just a couple of questions, just a couple of responses to that question, very quickly, it's about human stories. It's about empathy. It's about learning about the human condition. That's where I go from. I like all the big picture, the sort of the plate tectonics of human history as well, the geopolitics, the economic history of Alaska is fascinating. But at the end of the day, what really tugs at you, what you really is engaging, is the human stories. So it might be worth going back to that land acknowledgement statement, which kind of flew by in a heartbeat, and think about what that really means. And that's, some of you know my dad was Dale Guthrie, longtime scholar here on the campus. And one of the things he told me a long time ago was, actually, a lot of people don't know this, but one of the oldest sites, archaeological sites of human habitation is right here on this hill on Trothieta Ridge. Right over in the corner, it's the Charles Bunnell site. If you go across the quad, some of you I know aren't from Fairbanks, go out the front of the Wood Center, go across the quad, past the bronze statue of Bunnell. On the other side of the Bunnell building, that's that kind of ridiculous pink building from 1955. On the other side of that, there's a push out in the guardrail. That's where people hung out 13,000-ish years ago. It's amazing to think about what those people experienced when they first came here. And that's kind of where I come from emotionally when I think about how amazing this institution is, our state, our legacy that we've inherited. Here's a question for you historians in the room to think about. I know there's both amateur and professional historians. I don't know the answer to this, but think about this as you leave today or this weekend, is when is the best time to migrate from Siberia seasonally to Fairbanks, Alaska? I don't know the answer, but I know it's not today. It's rough out there today. If you imagine I like to think the first people came into this world. They came into our surroundings. They looked out across the valley. There were no trees. Alaska, we know Alaska was treeless at the time, or at least the interior. And you could see the game across the fields out below you. You knew the Tanana River was full of salmon. The Chena River was full of salmon. It was a land of plenty, a land of opportunity, a land of promise. And it is still that today. I think that's a special thing about our institution. It's a special thing about our state is how much opportunity there is, how much promise there is, economic and otherwise. And I think as historians, we sometimes, I'm not a historian, I'm truly a buff, but I think sometimes you have insights into what has come before and those human conditions for people to bask in that moment of wealth. I want to skip through a couple of touch points in history, and then I'm going to turn it over. 13,000 years ago, fast forward 13,000 years, I have on my office wall a photo from Noel Wien, 1924. He flew by campus, the first plane in Fairbanks. He took a picture out the side of the open biplane. He took a picture of the old main building here on College Hill. And just a few years before that, 1917, I think about that, look at that hill. It's a September day. You can see the leaves are off the trees. The building is out beautifully shining in the September sun. And just a few years before that, 1917, the legislature ratified that we were going to have, in the territory of Alaska, we're going to have a university here. And it was May 3rd. That's when that paper was signed. We like context. Historians love context. April 6th was the day the U.S. joined the Great War in Europe. Just 26 days or whatever that is, 27 days, the math there. Not a month. It's not even a month. It's just a few days. And here's another question for the historians. If you can help me sometime figure out the connection between the founding of UAF, of the University of Alaska, the College of Agriculture and Mines, and the Great War, I'm imagining there is a connection there. At the time, Kennecott Copper was producing copper. It was the biggest copper mine in North America. 1.1 billion pounds of copper, and copper was desperately needed for the war effort. How many pounds of Alaskan copper ended up on Flanders fields? That's a fascinating question, and that's our legacy, right? We still today live in this sort of connection to national security, rare minerals, the energy economy. That's still a really important thing. Fast forward a few more years, November 1955. Right next door here, in the then brand spanking new that summer Student Union. 55 delegates met to write and then ratify our state constitution. This amazing moment in our history as a state that will live forever. What were they thinking about when they were writing that document? You can read that document, envisioning, again, looking out on this land of plenty, this valley before us. That must have been inspiring to them in November, for God's sake. Like November through February, they actually signed it in Signers Hall. Signers Hall, for those of you who don't know, you should walk around. Constitution Hall is now what the old Student Union was. You'll see Constitution Hall on your left. You go across the quad. Directly opposing the Bunnell statue is Signers Hall. It was the gymnasium at the time. Of course, it was the biggest hall on campus. They went in there inside Signers Hall today, as of last summer, I think this summer. We have a new exhibit there. It's just a very small little thing, but we have a little wall exhibit containing some pieces of the gym floor and some photos of the signing. And I think that's some photos of the students playing a basketball game and a ball or a dance during World War II. That area was used for sort of celebrations for a long time. So just a couple touch points of where this institution sits. I know you have far more exciting and deep topics to explore, but I think ultimately the importance of history is something we all live, something we all recognize and feel. And it comes with that as you are experts and you have this knowledge, you carry this flame of understanding, and you're always seeking to find more. That comes with some responsibility. And maybe a challenge to you, a challenge to myself is, with that insight, with that perspective, what do you do with that? How do you share that? How do you relay that knowledge? I know many of you write or have written things. That's amazing to help inform the world. I think now more than ever, we are living history in this moment. I think most of you would agree, like, history is being written every day, internationally, nationally, in Alaska. The theme of the gas line, some of you may have heard that term before. I've been around a long time. Gas line conversation has been around a long time. but it's close. It's closer than it's ever been, and it connects to geopolitics. I hear it's the current federal administration's #1 domestic energy priority is the Alaska gas lines. Maybe that's close. South Korea's involved. Japan's involved. What will that mean for Fairbanks? What will it mean for Alaska? Historians, you folks, have an idea. Many of you, I can tell, were here during the pipeline. I remember the pipeline. I remember it came with great things and also difficult things. That's the way history is. It's challenging. So what is your responsibility toward being a carrier of this flame of knowledge? And just to kind of end on that's a little bit of a somber note. It's a little heavy note because history's heavy, but it's beautiful. And I think just my last note is I take comfort from history, and I imagine some of you do as well. History comes in, the human condition has ebbs and flows. We have good times, we have challenging times, and then we have good times again. And I think today out there, I think about maybe those first people came to this hill on a day like today, and they're like, oh my God, we got to get ready for winter. It's coming. It's just like it's going to snow this weekend, folks. It's coming. We got to get ready, and maybe we don't have enough food put away, but we do know that May is also coming. With the winter comes the spring, and that's coming. And regardless of sort of all of our trials and tribulations and everything, history has shown us that things generally get better over time for the human condition. And I'm really optimistic about our spring. And so thank you for being here. Welcome to UAF. Have a wonderful conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you. And I'm going to pass it off now back to, yes.
Give me 1 second. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Vice Chancellor Guthrie. That was such a great, I'm glad you drew the short straw and were the one to welcome us here. That was an interesting discussion of the importance of history and the importance to all of us. So my job is to introduce Justice Carney. It's a pleasure to do that. She did give her State of the Judiciary speech to the legislature last session. I think she'd been in office for maybe a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, but it was very short. I look forward to your next speech to the legislature on the court system after you've been in office for some time. Justice Carney has been almost 40 years in Alaska. She began in 1967, I believe, as a law clerk. And in 2 years, that'll be 40 years in law, in judiciary in Alaska, and we appreciate that. So 40 years, she graduated from Radcliffe and Harvard Law School, and clerked for the Alaska Supreme Court, and as a public defender, and then the Alaska Office of Public Advocacy for almost 30 years, focused on criminal law, and that's the office that deals with issues of child guardianship and advocacy, as well as elder assistance. Yesterday, we had the opportunity of hearing the governor speak, and that was really quite remarkable. And he had some very nice things to say about you. You know, we have a wonderful system in this state of the Judiciary Council. The Judiciary Council gives the governor 2 or more names, and he has to choose from that list. Can't add anybody else. Can't ignore that list. And he said that as he was looking, as he didn't know anybody that was up for being a justice. And after the interviews, he said that he knew this was the right choice because you had been working in advocacy for so many years. And what he said is that she could have gotten a job anywhere in triple-digit salaries anywhere in the country, but chose to be here in Alaska. And I certainly appreciate that. So, you know, we have this wonderful judiciary system. The Constitutional Convention came up with some plans for the judiciary, but we decided that we couldn't afford it to start with, and we were going to let the federal government continue with its judiciary system with the judges and the federal courts. But the first state legislature said, nah, this is not going to work. We need to have our own system. And very quickly, they created the judicial system here in Alaska. So I look forward to hearing what the Chief Justice has to say. You know, it is important to realize that there are 5 justices. 3 now are women. I think that's the first time that has occurred. Justice, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Justice Carney is the second woman. We have a House of Representatives that has a majority of women. Senate, yeah, that takes some work to get to us. But anyway, it's a great pleasure that I have to introduce Justice Carney, and she will be coming up here. And I understand that Barbara Hood, who is here as well, will be doing a conversation with us. So please welcome Chief Justice Carney.
Can you hear me?
Not you. Hello? Okay, just speak real into
Much
it.
better. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank Justice Carney for being here. I've really looked forward to this. It's a huge honor to be asked to be in conversation with someone I've admired for a long time. It's just a great honor for me personally to be here to celebrate the Constitutional Convention, because when my family moved to Fairbanks 60 years ago, we lived in a little log house right next door to Constitution Hall. We lived there for a couple of years. So this place means a lot to me. Being in Fairbanks means a lot to me. And I wanted to start with this photograph. Hopefully. Let's see. Oh,
Not that one.
I'll get it back up.
sorry. Well, we'll start. But it's an honor because Justice Carney is, as Senator Stevens said, the first Chief Justice to preside over a court of predominantly women, with the appointment this spring of Justice Amy Orevic here in Fairbanks. It's only the second time there have been two justices in Fairbanks, and the first time both justices in Fairbanks are women. And I think another significant factor is the fact that, okay, maybe, yeah, I am. Let's see.
You can
Left.
do two left clicks. Oh, not help.
Whoops.
Sorry.
We did practice. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so just left click and then we'll go.
Okay, great. Thank you. As you'll see from this, not only is Supreme Court predominantly women, but our Court of Appeals is predominantly women. So 6 of our 9 appellate judges here in Alaska are women. And I think that is a huge significant move, considering that when our Constitution was being written, Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg couldn't even get jobs in the legal profession, even though they graduated at the top of their class. So big advance in the 70 years. And I just wanted to know, Chief Justice Carney, if you could speak to that, what significance does that have to you?
It's obviously important. I think it is a sign that reflects how legal education has gone recently. We visit different law schools to get law clerks. And the student populations at most schools are either kind of 50-50 men and women, or many schools have more women than men. So I think it just took some time for legally educated women to move up in the ranks, and also for Alaska to add more women. When I spoke to the legislature in the spring, in my 3rd week as chief, I said something like, and it's about time, because we're a majority in the state. And by the time I talked to a reporter in the afternoon, he said, "You're wrong. There's still like 51% men and 49% women," or something like that.
Well, thank you. And the Civil Rights Act opened a lot of those doors in the early 60s.
Yes.
So I think there was a bit of a lag between that event and then women actually stepping into these leadership roles. You came to Alaska straight from law school to clerk with, okay, we'll try this. Oh, Chief Justice Jay Rabinowitz. I just wondered if you could comment briefly on what brought you to Alaska, what made you think of Alaska?
The big thing was I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated from law school. My father had actually spent a couple years in the Army during the Korean conflict. And he was a good downhill skier. And he and a buddy realized that they had not seen any newsreels from Korea that featured skiing. So when they saw a posting that the Army was looking for ski instructors, they volunteered. They were sent to what is now Fort Greely and was then Big Delta Camp. So even though I grew up 50 miles from Boston, I grew up with these beautiful pictures of the Alaska Range. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I saw a job posting at school that the Alaska Supreme Court was looking for law clerks. So I signed up. My interview was pretty unusual, but I do remember the justice that interviewed me said, looking at your resume, you look like an athlete. Jay likes athletes. What do you feel about going to Fairbanks? And I said, I'll go to Fairbanks. And he said, really?
That's fantastic. As we know, many of you know, Chief Justice Rabinowitz was a long-time 32-year justice on the Supreme Court and served 4 terms as Chief Justice, and the courthouse here in Fairbanks is named after him. Quite a legendary figure. But he also had a really strong reputation for encouraging his law clerks to stay here. It was almost an obsession. So you did, and I'm just wondering what drew you to that decision.
You know, I didn't realize how truly legendary Jay was when I came up. I really didn't know much about Alaska except my father's pictures. And he didn't really throw his weight around in a way that I, as a law clerk, saw. But he definitely, I think, was trying to make sure I stayed. So one December, I came to work on a Monday or a Tuesday, and he said, Friday, don't come to work. I want you to go out to the east ramp of the airport. And I said, okay. He said, you're on a basketball team. You're going up to Anaktuvik Pass for a tournament. And I did. At that time, Frontier Flying Service existed, and it serviced all the North Slope villages. And every December, they would do a weekend women's tournament and the next weekend a men's tournament. So he put me on this team that they would throw together each year. I went up that year, and I continued to go up for many years. And so 2 or 3 months into my time up here, I was out in a rural village seeing what that was like. And I think Jay was just a step ahead of me, you know, introducing me to things in Alaska that weren't just Anchorage and Fairbanks.
When did you decide that, or did it start to look like Fairbanks might be a home?
Not originally, because I remember at Christmas time seriously thinking about not coming back and thinking, so I burn a bridge in Alaska. You know, who cares? But I did come back.
I think it's worth observing that you are the first of Justice Rabinowitz's law clerks who has served on the Supreme Court in the same position that he held for so many different terms. So I'm sure he's very proud, very pleased with that. I think now, let's see if we'll get, there we go. We're going to talk a little bit about the Judiciary article, where it all began here in the 1955 Constitutional Convention, right next door. And specifically the Committee on the Judiciary, which convened during the convention and considered what we needed to do as a new state to have a judiciary. We had to start from scratch. The federal system had been here for decades at that point. And they ultimately adopted the Judiciary article, which is so short and succinct and simple that we've left copies for many of you, and your pocket Judiciary article, because to me, it has served, even as small and succinct as it is, it's served well over time. And I wondered if you could describe some of the major features of that article, and maybe start with Section 1, which was the unified court system.
We have a unified court system, which means we don't have municipal courts, we don't have borough courts. We just have the state justice system has just one court system. There's a federal system, and there are tribal courts. But for the state of Alaska, I'm in charge of it all. I'm in charge of here in Fairbanks and Anchorage and Juneau, certainly, but also all the smaller areas, Utqiagvik, Bethel, Nome, Sitka. And I think that's really critical because it means that everybody is in the same justice system, that the judges are selected the same way. The courts have the same staff. They have judges, they have judicial assistants. There are prosecutors and public defenders that are in each court. There are attorney generals, assistant attorney generals that cover all kinds of different civil topics. And then there are private attorneys that will go and be subject to exactly the same rules and the same way of resolving their disputes.
A second and maybe considered more minor provision that's also really important is Section 15, which gives the court its own rulemaking power. Just you can set the procedures and the process for the way that cases go forward. How important is that? How significant?
You know, it's surprisingly important, which is not to say sometimes it's not deadly boring, right? But it establishes the rules. You know, the rules in Utqiagvik are the same as the rules in Anchorage. And the rules provide information to people on how they can file their concerns with the court, how to start a lawsuit, how to figure out who gets the kids. And as time has gone on, the rules are the place where changes in society get reflected. And some of it is really simple, just changing words. Old rules tend to talk about he and him, you know, and now they talk about the person or the plaintiff or the defendant. But more importantly, rules allow for things like video procedures, people appearing in court by telephone. Many states outside Alaska will not allow you to appear by telephone or video conference. Much of that changed in the pandemic, but they require you to just come. Well, you can't just come from one of the YK Delta villages.
Thanks. And another provision that gets a lot of attention is Section 5, which established a system for merit selection of judges and also for voter retention. Could you explain a little bit about how that works?
I can. And it's important, and many people in Alaska don't really understand it. So the first thing is the merit selection of judges. You have never seen in Alaska an ad for vote for this person for judge, because we don't do that. Many places outside have that process of selecting their judges. And the Judiciary Committee kicked that idea around for a long time. And ultimately, when they came up with a proposal, no member of that committee, even though at least one had started, at the time, I guess there was a municipal court in Anchorage. And so one member of the committee had been an elected judge on that municipal court. And so he was putting forth the idea, well, maybe we should have some kind of election. But after the days of discussing exactly how do we get to having our own judges, even he had been persuaded that elected judges were just not a good idea. So instead, what happens is lawyers who meet minimum qualifications. Do you live here? Are you actually a lawyer? Are you actually a lawyer who has practiced law for so many years? Have you not been in trouble with the bar? Have you certainly not been convicted of crimes? You can apply. You fill out a really long written application. That goes to the Alaska Judicial Council, which is also set up in the Constitution. The Judicial Council collects the applications and then rates every member of the Alaska Bar Association on how good is this person in 5 categories, which I have to read because I don't always remember them. Legal skill, integrity, diligence, temperament, and impartiality. They get a score from 0 to 5 or 1 to 5. And then working with, I think it's the statistical department in the Justice Department at UAA, they give everybody a number, and then they tell everybody what the number is. If most of the candidates have a high number and someone has a particularly low one, they get notice a week or 2 earlier than everybody else does. So that might be the time to sort of exit gracefully stage left. But the people that stay, then they know their score, it is released publicly. Following that, each of the remaining applicants is interviewed for about 45 minutes by the Judicial Council. The Judicial Council is 3 lawyers that the Bar Association picks, 3 non-lawyers who are selected by the governor and have to be confirmed by the legislature. And then the chief, so me, gets to be the chair. And much like the vice president is president of the Senate, I only do anything other than kind of organize the meeting if there's a tie.
Right. And as a current member of the council, how is that, do you feel that process works? Do you feel that you're finding what the Constitutional Convention members called the tallest timber?
I do. And the constitutional delegates, as Barb mentioned, said, oh, so after they're interviewed, only the tallest timber in that group are recommended to the governor. There have to be at least 2 choices because the governor has to get an actual choice. But if there's a large group, it could be a long list of people whose names are given to the governor. But I do know that the council members take their job very, very seriously. Each member gets like a binder of information about these applicants. They go through it very, very carefully, and the way the council works is we just kind of go around the table and people ask questions of the applicant. And the questions are really probing.
And then once the nominations are made, once the council votes and forwards them to the governor, it's my understanding the governor has 45 days, so it's a limited period of time to move those, to make a decision. And it is the governor's decision, and he or she is an elected official. So in a way that gave the first step was to make sure the qualifications were there and we were getting the best people for the job, because it's a unique job, a hard job. And then the next step was more of a political position. And then the third step really is the fact that at certain intervals after the appointment, judges stand for retention here. So there's sort of there's a balance that I think the council was trying to create, the Judiciary article is trying to create between making sure we had really good people, but also understanding that the public had some role in who got selected and how they were retained. Overall, it's, we've had this system for 70 years. Other states don't do it this way necessarily, and the federal government doesn't do it this way. Could you maybe speak to how we're different and how we sort of, how we compare, I guess?
I think the short answer of why we're different is we're at the end of the line, right? So the Judiciary Committee could look at what everyone else had done and say, not that, maybe. And what they came up with was this system. And what Barb refers to at the end, these retention elections, are the check that you as voters have on us. After someone is appointed, the first general election that comes up more than 3 years after they've been appointed will have their name on the ballot. And it's simply for a thumbs up, thumbs down vote. Very few judges have not been retained. And voters don't always know just how important and how, I think, nuanced that power is that people have. The Judicial Council originally didn't have the authority to sort of review judges up for retention. The Constitution was amended to give them that little additional power so that now, on our next election in 2026, there will be judge names on the ballot. They're at the end of the ballot because I know that Justice, Not Politics talks about finish the ballot, finish the ballot. So there are a bunch of judges, it will be their first time on the ballot. And that is voters' opportunity to say, are they doing okay or not? After that, assuming that they are retained, then at each level of the court, there's a different interval when the name will appear on the ballot again. So I think it's 4 years for district court, 6 years for superior court, 8 years for the Court of Appeals, and then 10 years for the Supreme Court. And the Judicial Council goes through the same kind of evaluation for every judge on the ballot as they did originally. And in that big voter pamphlet that still comes in paper, there will be sort of, we recommend that this judge be retained, or once in a while, we recommend that this judge not be retained. And here's why. Here are the scores that police officers give this judge. Here is what court employees think of them as a boss. Here's what social workers and people that have done trials in front of them think. Here's what the lawyers that appear in front of them think. So the information is there.
Well, thank you. I think after the judiciary article was adopted after statehood, the original council met in '59, and the original judges were in place by late 1959 for the two courts that the Constitution created specifically, the Supreme Court and the Superior Court. But there was no court system, and there was no courthouse or place for them to be or go. The statehood act allowed for 3 years for the creation of the court system. But as I think Senator Stevens mentioned, there was an urgency. The state couldn't wait that long. Could you explain that?
You know, excuse me for a second. This is a big state that was previously a big territory. When we were under the federal judiciary system, there were 4 judges for all of Alaska. And so that, you know, it was not planes, you know, getting around took a long time. Judge Wickersham talks about dog sledding all over the place for weeks and weeks at a time. That makes a good story, but as Jay Rabinowitz remarked, it was rock bottom for a judiciary system. You know, there's only 4, and Alaskans had no say in who these people were. They had no say in whether they stayed as judges. Another person who had experience with that system was Charlie Cole, the former AG who lives here. And he was quoted as saying, well, if you had a civil case and you filed it, then it just disappeared. But I think, so that was the backdrop about why we were bound to do better if we had our own state system. But the thing that really forced urgency was the federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a decision that basically said, you guys are states now, we don't need to take your cases, have at it. And so very quickly, a state judiciary a judicial system had to come into being.
And I wonder if you could speak to, the court system started operating with the judges that existed in February of 1960. And there's one person credited with the speed with which it came into place. Could you speak to that? And that was the Chief Justice Buell Nesbitt. He's pictured here in the middle. This is the first Supreme Court.
Right. So he had been in the Navy and he had been on a troop ship. And he knew he was dealing with this unified court system where, you know, Barrow's a long way away from really anything at that time. But the courts had to all be in the same system and they all had to operate in a basic way that was the same. And despite the size of the territory, Alaska's population was not very big. You've all seen TVs or movies with the court stenographers who are busily typing. Well, I can't imagine there were many, if any, in Alaska in 1960. But courts have to make a record somehow. And as former Judge Nisha Steinkruger spent some time finding and then pointing out to me, he fell back on his naval experience and decided to record court proceedings. Just so if even now, if you go to court, there are microphones on every table. We don't have court stenographers. Everything is recorded. He obviously didn't have the high-tech equipment that we have now. He had something called a sound scriber, which they had used in the Navy to record proceedings going on there. And he just brought it over. I don't know that he intended it to be as revolutionary as it is, but it's remarkable because a judge can go, even at that time, I mean, they were bigger than what people have to carry now, but could take the recording equipment to Nome on a late Monday and just run court proceedings by turning it on.
Went a long way. And they also, these are our first Superior Court judges who were appointed and in place. But it became clear really quickly that there weren't enough judicial officers, even though we had some of the equipment and some of the facilities being in place. So the legislature, another provision of the Judiciary article, granted the legislature the authority to expand courts or create courts at the request of the Supreme Court. And they did that fairly quickly. And I wondered if you could just walk us through some of those changes that they made.
You know, one of the I think at the time, most amazing changes was that the court system realized we really have to maintain a unified system, which means we really have to have a court presence in a whole lot of places all over Alaska. And so the solution was magistrate court, was in a whole lot of different locations, something like 70 locations. There was at least a small court, which was often a room of a municipal building, and a local leader, someone who was respected in the community, became the magistrate. Respected local leaders in Immonik had not gone to law school. So the magistrates didn't have to be trained at all in the law. The court system trained them how to run courts and do court procedures, but few, if any, of the magistrates had any legal training.
And that was
And-
true also of the district court, the early district court judges.
It
We have a
was.
couple of early women, non-law trained judicial leaders.
And let me, Sadie Brower-Neakuk was the first magistrate in Barrow and now at Keyavik. I will be up there a week from today to rename our courthouse for her.
And we should note that Nora Gwynn, the Bethel Court Complex is also named for Judge Nora Gwynn. She was actually a district court judge, one of the earliest appointed in 1966.
And when the district, so there were the magistrate courts, and a little later, the district courts were created, and many magistrates just rolled into being district court judges, still without legal training. That has changed more recently. But when I first started practicing here in Fairbanks, I practiced for years in front of Judge Crutchfield, who had been a magistrate, and before that had been a gas station owner in Delta.
Different. There was also a few other legislative expansions that occurred pretty early on. The Supreme Court expanded to 5 people. I love this photograph. There's Buell Nesbitt in the middle, clearly a serious person. And then in 1980, the legislature expanded to create a court of appeals because of the volume of criminal cases that were coming in. And this is our first court of appeals. So I wanted to just mention that it seemed like the 60s, 70s, and maybe early 80s were a period when the court sort of established itself, created the facilities, filled got the good staff. But then, and kind of settled on a structure about like this. It's pretty much unchanged since 1980. Is that right? It seems to work well. It percolates along, and if there's more judges needed in a location or more facilities needed, the court's been able to expand. And I don't know if you'd agree, but it seems like the last decades have been more focused on how we deliver justice and what the challenges are as changes have happened, and the Judiciary article, how it has allowed those changes to be implemented in the court to move forward with all the new demands. The state looks a lot different than it did in 1955. I wonder if you could speak. I guess what I'd like to start with is just some of the changes that you've seen, and start by focusing on maybe your experiences in the bush, how they differed when you started from what they look like today.
I was a public defender for about 10 years and then worked at the Office of Public Advocacy for almost 20, which is essentially the second public defender agency. With the public defenders, I was responsible for, I was assigned to certain interior villages. And then with the Office of Public Advocacy, I did all of our cases from the North Slope. So I spent a lot of time going to rural places and appearing in rural courts. At the beginning, a lot of hearings were done by telephone. And phone calls to then Barrow went a lot like, "This is Sue Carney, I'm calling in for hearing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, Miss Carney, I'll put you on hold. 1, 2. Alaska had always had telephone hearings because we have always had faraway courts. When the pandemic hit, no one was going anywhere, but courts still had to function at a basic level. We switched to Zoom, which for us was a huge improvement for all these outlying courts. It was far more disruptive, I think, for most states outside than it was for us, because we already had this practice of people appearing without really appearing, and picking between a poor phone connection and Zoom, where we're right here, was a great improvement for us. And it allowed us to come up with new ways to allow people access to courts. In some of the really small villages where people needed to participate in courts, but all they had maybe was their phone, maybe not even a good connection at home, the court system worked with a lot of tribal councils and native associations to set up maybe one computer in the council office so people could come there and appear by Zoom from that office, where they would have a good connection and have, in some ways, better access to the court than they used to.
And I think one thing that, this is a good segue into the tribal courts. You mentioned earlier that there are tribal courts in Alaska now. There's certainly tribes that are more involved in court proceedings. I was practicing back in the late 80s out of Bethel and some other villages on the Yukon when I worked out of Fairbanks. And the Indian Child Welfare Act had been enacted in 1979, and tribes at that point had a right to be involved in child in need of aid proceedings, had a right to, and there were other rules that set out how they could even claim jurisdiction, but it was early on, and so very few tribes did get involved, even though that they received notice and there might have been interest, they simply weren't prepared to take that on. But then in the 90s, when the federal government recognized Alaska's tribes as federally recognized officially, creating over 220 tribal entities and drawing a lot of resources into the state to help them develop. I think things have changed just enormously in that time, and I wonder if you could speak to that, how it has affected the state court system.
It really has. There are 227 tribes in Alaska, because in Alaska, unlike everywhere else in America, each separate community, each village is its own federally recognized tribe. So that involves an enormous array of size of tribe, sophistication of tribe, ability to participate in court proceedings. As Barb mentioned, the Indian Child Welfare Act sets out some rules that require state courts to give full faith and credit, which means treat just like it was an order from California or Iowa to a tribal court order when it comes to court. So if, for example, the Tlingit and Haida organization is very sophisticated, in many ways very much resembles the way the state court works. They do a lot of family law. They issue child support orders. They decide custody and adoptions. And at times, the Indian Child Welfare Act allows tribes to take child protection cases out of state court. And so they do that quite frequently. They're real sophisticated at doing that. And so if they issue a child support order and they want it registered in our court in Juneau, we do it. On the other hand, there are really small tribes. Young woman who worked in the court a couple of years ago is from Nelson Lagoon, which is about 40 people. You know, they do not have the capability that the much, much larger Tlingit Haida has.
So that it really is a tribe by tribe arrangement
Really
that the
is a tribe
states.
by tribe.
Yeah. I wonder, you mentioned children's cases, but there's also developments with some of the tribes in the criminal arena, specifically, I know Kenai and Kenaitze tribe, and then the Sitka tribe. Or could you describe those courts? I think that was very interesting.
So the Kenaitze tribe and the Kenai Superior Court, Kenai state judges, have for over 10 years done a wellness court, the Hinu Wellness Court, which is focused on people who are in trouble with the courts for substance abuse problems. And the two judges sit side by side over this court, and they work with people. The broad overarching idea is to get these people rehabilitated rather than just convicted. And so to allow them to heal in a way that's simply convicting someone, putting them on probation, telling them not to drink, is not going to do. And they've been extremely successful. Sitka is a much smaller place, but they are working on a real similar one, where people who are charged with like a felony DUI can opt into that court and work toward not only kind of making restoration to the community for whatever they did while under the influence, but really working on getting themselves to a point where they're not going to be back in that state of being so intoxicated that they're doing things that get them in trouble.
I think on that note, even not even in the tribal court context, there's been an effort on by the state courts over the last 25 years to develop therapeutic courts, which have sort of, as you were describing, the aim is to keep people from the revolving door, to reduce recidivism. Our recidivism rates for a lot of criminal cases are terrible, in the high like 60s. People end up coming back through. But these courts have been successful in significantly reducing those rates. And I wondered, because of the different emphasis, I wondered if you could speak to some of the types of therapeutic courts that exist now in the state.
You know, I think the first one and the biggest ones are these wellness courts for people with substance abuse problems. We have a large one in Fairbanks. Anchorage has them. The KEYNOTE court in Kenai falls under that same kind of title. And one of the things about the wellness court here, because I'm more familiar with how that one works, is a big part of the program is, in effect, a support group for the people. Everybody in the court meets every Wednesday or every Thursday for an hour before they all go into court. And then each of them is there as the judge reviews the progress that they're making. And when people graduate, it's a huge celebration that people have done all these things. They are in recovery from whatever their problem was. They've been able to make amends for whatever damage they caused. And the people that they've been going through this court with, the other defendants, but also the prosecutors and the attorneys and the substance abuse counselor that they've been working with, and maybe the job counselor that's helped them get a job now that they're sober, celebrate that. And it's a very different proceeding than sort of regular court.
I was reminded I attended a graduation once. They're very emotional and moving experiences. But one of the graduates said, when it was the state of Alaska against me, I had a problem with that. But when it was the state of Alaska against my addiction, I could do that. I could live with that. Another area I think has been seeing tremendous changes in family law. Huge numbers of cases in the court involve divorce, custody, child support, and those kinds of issues that are also emotionally charged and very, very difficult. And the court has done some amazing things, I believe, in the last decade or so to dampen to get results without the trauma, without the high levels of conflict. And one that's, I wonder if you wouldn't mind speaking to, is the early resolution program, what that looks like and how that differs from a traditional fight it all out in court approach.
So the early resolution program is, let me back up. A huge number of parents involved in child custody and divorce cases don't have lawyers, either because they're Alaskans and they don't need no lawyers, or they want one but they can't find one or can't afford one, or they can't afford one and they're on an endless waiting list for Alaska Legal Services. So they come to court without lawyers. And the court system has to figure out how to deal with that. You know, it's easy for us to deal with lawyers because we all went to the same school, people know the rules. Sometimes they get a little out of hand, but in general, everybody's kind of got it down. That's not true for just some parents that find themselves in front of a judge. So for many years here, there was a separate program that the Child Custody Investigator's Office ran that did kind of settlement to get parents to come up with agreements about what they were doing with their kids. During the time my husband was in charge. And they would sit the parents down and say, look, if you guys can agree what's going on with your kid, it's going to be better for the kid, because otherwise some stranger in a black robe is just going to tell you what you have to do. And they don't know you, right? I mean, they can't know you. If they're your best friend, they're not going to be your judge. So that seemed to be more successful. Building on that, this early resolution program became more broadly available in courts, where these parents who don't have lawyers, their cases come in, and there are staff people in Anchorage who will try to get them to agree to a program where mediators or volunteer attorneys will work with them toward the same end. Whatever they can agree to, whatever resolution they can get before going to trial is almost certainly going to be better for the family in the future than fighting it out in front of a judge.
Thank you. Another area that the court seems, thank you. has really been focusing on is, we have this tremendously diverse state, all wildly geographically separated communities. And one of the overarching, duties of the court system is to provide justice fairly and equally, and to make sure that access is reasonable for everyone. And the court has a Fairness and Access Commission that's been involved for many years in trying to come up with ways to make sure that the court does remain as fair as possible. And I'm wondering if you just speak briefly to some of the initiatives that it's undertaken.
So one of the very successful and honestly very fun programs that we run, Fairness and Access and the Fairness, Diversity, and Equality Committees coordinate, is a program called The Color of Justice. It is an outreach program to high school kids. It was originally developed by the National Association of Women Judges to convince high school kids of color to all grow up and become judges. They're not going to. So we have expanded that a great deal in Alaska. We get kids, every other year we do it at Mount Edgecombe, which is great, in part because we have this captive audience. And then in between, we do it in Anchorage and bring in kids from all different high schools. And they play games like Constitutional Cranium. Mount Edgecombe, they were playing, I think, Constitutional Monopoly with 3-foot by 3-foot fuzzy pink dice that took one kid each to roll in the cafeteria. And we talked to them certainly about, why don't you go to law school? And after forever, why don't you get to be a judge? But we also talked to them about everything else the court needs, because we're part of the community. So we need accountants to make sure the bail money is where the bail money is supposed to be. We need social workers to work with those families that end up. If you're from a community that is always angry at how you're being treated by the police because they don't look like you and they don't act like you and they don't come from here, well, why not be a police officer? And so we do that for 2 days. We get all kinds of volunteers. We have judges, we have lawyers, we have people from Seattle U, from Gonzaga Law Schools, from University of Washington, talking to all these people. We just got a national award at the Conference of Chief Justices for this program because it's so successful in doing such outreach in a state like this.
And I love that program. And sorry for that slide. I don't know what happened. Touching on the same thing, reaching out to young people, the court has really focused a lot on fostering education, public education about the judiciary, because I think as the quiet branch that just hums along doing its work quietly in courtrooms, unless it's a big crime or a public policy issue, the public often doesn't know what goes on in our courtrooms, doesn't see the judges as public officials, or even understand really the basic process. And I'm wondering, what kinds of programs is the court doing to facilitate public knowledge, public trust and confidence, and specifically the Supreme Court Live program, which I love. I love this picture. You're holding court in the gymnasium of Nome Belts High School last fall.
Yeah. So Supreme Court Live is a real live Supreme Court argument that we do at a high school. A lot of Supreme Courts in other states do those at law schools, but we don't have a law school. So the pattern has been, I think we do them about every year or so. Every other one is in Anchorage because it's easy to just get all the Anchorage kids. And then we go somewhere else. So the most recent one was in Nome in December. The one before that was at Lathrop. One before, there was a couple in Anchorage, I think. We've also done them in Kenai, Palmer, West Valley. And again, I love it because frankly, I'd rather talk to teenagers all day long than lawyers. Um, But the way it works is we do an argument just like we would do an argument if we were in our courtroom. And then the justices go away so that the kids have a half hour to ask questions of the lawyers. We have to go away because we have to decide the case just on what was argued during the argument. We can't hear strategy or why they did this or how come they did that. So depending on where the school we're in, we'll go to the teacher's lounge for half an hour and take off our robes, and then we come back. In Nome, we hung out in the wrestling room. Then we sort of draped our robes over the barbells and went back out to talk to the kids, which is why we're not wearing robes.
And that also includes the attorneys going into the classrooms and really talking about the cases. So it's a
Yeah, and it's
long-term
different
process.
attorneys usually. Volunteer attorneys in the month or so leading up to the Supreme Court Live will go out and sort of prep the kids. Here's what it's about. Here are what the lawyers are trying to prove. What do you think the issues are?
And why, first of all, why is public trust and confidence so important? And how have these programs, in your opinion, improved that?
We issue these rulings and tell you you have to do this or you can't do that. And at a basic level, we depend upon the respect that people have for us to obey those orders. For Alaska in particular, we don't have a law school. So we need people to understand what we're doing. We need people who are younger than me to want to take my place at some point. It'd be awesome if it was all kids who grew up here, went away to law school, came back, worked their way up, became judges, and ended up on the Supreme Court. But we know we have to bring people from other states where they have law schools. And we do that. That's what got me here. All of my law clerks and 2 of Justice Aravik's law clerks are here today, along with Justice Aravik's assistant. I'm using this as outreach to try and convince them, here's another reason to stay. Look at all these people that care.
That's awesome. And we're almost ready to take a few questions, but I just thought maybe looking back, it's been 70 years, 65 since we've been a state. How do you think the judiciary article has held up?
I think it's been great. I think as I was preparing for this and thinking about being here where it all began, one, that was kind of heavy, as Dean Guthrie said. 2, I figure Winter and Fairbanks will really focus you for a while if you're in a room. But I think that the simplicity was genius. We're not all bogged down in little details about do we do this or that and how do we have to do it. And the flexibility built into that to make the few changes that have been made, I think has just improved our system. There are a lot of challenges in a state like this to bring justice to all corners of it, but we're doing our best, and I think we're doing an okay job.
Thank you so much. We'll conclude the main presentation, but there is time for questions, or is there? Do we have a few minutes? Hi. Here's somebody.
Yes, Justice, it's difficult, of course, to speak of the future, but there seems to be a difference between Alaska's considering color, location, a variety of things that our president has told the country to ignore. What is your opinion on this?
Should I intervene?
Communities that we serve are Alaskan, include Alaska Native people, Black people, and Latino people, and people from all over the world.
Oh, no.
I'll get it. How's this? No. I broke it. We have to reflect our communities. Much as I hate to give Anchorage any due, they have one of the most diverse student populations in their public schools of any place in the United States. We can't pretend that that is not a fact, and we can't pretend that the people that we represent are of all one type.
Test. Okay.
You mentioned a couple times that we don't have a law school. Should we?
You know, it is a constant topic that comes up in legal circles. I don't know that we have enough people to support the UAF law school or a UAA law school. What the Bar Association is spending a lot of effort to promote and to work with are other schools that have remote options. And the American Bar Association and the Conference of Chief Justices are also looking at different ways to provide legal education. I know Arizona State University Law School has been approved for a pilot program that is entirely remote. Everybody else, all the other law schools that have mostly remote programs still require people to come for, like a long weekend every semester at least, or a week. That's a lot more accessible to Alaskans. So I think that's probably the way we're going to have to go.
This question is a little bit out of your purview, but it's on my mind. Why isn't the Supreme Court of the United States doing a better job of explaining to us the very controversial decisions that it's making? I think it's leaving the American public really in a state of misunderstanding, and the implications are very serious.
I can't read their minds any better than you can. I mean, I know that legal commentators have expressed their opinion about the lack of opinions, as have dissenting voices on some orders. The Alaska Supreme Court is very different from the US Supreme Court in a number of ways, starting with, we cannot turn anybody away. And our state constitution allows everybody the right to appeal. So we get a huge variety of appeals, from neighbors fighting over whose driveway it is, maybe without lawyers in front of us, all the way up to taxation and elections. We write an opinion for everything. In the legal world, there are published and so-called unpublished opinions. The published ones go in those sort of tan books with the little red marks on them that you see in the back of every single lawyer ad you ever saw. And the unpublished ones don't go in there. At this point, since everything has moved to online, there's less and less of a difference between published and unpublished. But for our purposes, there's almost none, because we still write them. We still write them. And the reason we do that is because if these people fighting over their driveway care enough to ask us to resolve it, they deserve an answer, and they deserve to know why they got that answer.
As you know, a few Alaska governors, including the current one, have tried to upend the judicial selection process by rejecting the names that are sent, asking for specific candidates, or even tried to appoint people to the commission that are not qualified. How do you use your keen diplomatic skills to work through that issue?
Haven't had to yet, but I've only been in this job for 8 months. You know, the Constitution lays out the process. It proposed any change has to be a constitutional amendment. It seems that every 10 years, the idea of a new constitutional convention is roundly defeated. So there are other avenues to amend the Constitution, but they haven't happened.
I have a really easy one. Do you still play basketball? And in the villages, do you go to open gym?
Not for the last couple of years. I was playing up until about 2 years ago. There's a pickup game every Tuesday and Thursday in the back of the city hall if anyone wants to play.
I just have, it's a history question about use of juries in Alaska. During the territorial period when there were just 4 judicial districts and 4 judges, I'm most familiar with interior Alaska. They often went on a circuit to try cases. And one of the problems they faced was getting to a location and not being able to impanel a jury because there weren't enough people. And in one instance, Judge Wickersham, when he temporarily took over the Western District and had to go over to Nome, he impaneled the jury before he left and took the jury with him. And I was just wondering whether that problem with impaneling juries lingered over into the state period and what the court system did about it.
Sometimes we have trouble getting juries. As you can imagine, smaller communities may pose more of a problem, particularly in really small communities where people are closely related. You know, there are rules about how close a relative you can be to be on a jury. And things like hunting season, fishing in Dillingham. So the court system tries to work within the Constitution to get a jury. We also have case law and rules that require a jury of your peers. So long ago, it's way easier to do all trials in Fairbanks and Anchorage and Juneau than to also include Fort Yukon or Galena or Nenana. But the populations of those villages do not look like the population of Fairbanks or Anchorage. So we now try to draw jurors from a bigger area in order to have a population that looks more like wherever the defendant came from in criminal cases. But if we can't get a jury, it can be moved to another place.
Thanks. I was wondering what you feel like are the major challenges, and problems to solve going forward, for justice at large in Alaska. And I'm thinking in particular of like public defenders or what you feel like are the big challenges.
Having enough lawyers, really.
That's my question.
You mentioned the public defenders. I know that the legislature gave all state agency lawyers a big raise 2 years ago. They all got a 20% raise specifically to try and keep people in those jobs because they work really hard, and particularly on the heels of the pandemic, in the criminal system, there's a lot of catch-up being done. Cases where you just couldn't go to trial because nobody wanted to be in a room with 13 strangers. So, this branch of government just provides the courtrooms for that. we do what we can in outreach to try to bring people to Alaska, to try to encourage people to, be here, be lawyers, become judges, reach out to your community and show people what we do. But I don't think we have a more direct way to continue that.
Thank you for your comments. I think it's illuminated a lot of us in aspects that we didn't consider before. As I've gotten older, I've started to look a lot at obituaries. And what's interesting to me is that whenever you get into people from the South Pacific Islands or Alaska Native villages, they always mention the parents, but there are hundreds of uncles and aunties. And I think that really says a lot about how we reckon who is responsible and what the village is that raises that child. And I think it's wonderful that finally we're getting to acknowledge that there's a larger family than that's defined biologically. And I think anything we can do to support the people who support the kids is really like the therapeutic items that you're talking about. We need to be considering that more broadly. And we have defined ourselves into a little box, which unfortunately has been detrimental. And we're on the other side of that curve, I hope. So I really think it's wonderful that we're looking more at ways to help families and individuals become productive citizens. And whatever we can do, we should be doing more. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Sorry, all the way over.
This is my fault because I broke it.
I appreciate your pointing out, to kind of support more Alaskans getting into law. And as one gentleman mentioned, it's even harder now for minorities and, Alaska Natives to do that. And perhaps this is to the people of the legislature and anything you can do to support it. But, an analogy, what can we do? Can we, legislature, perhaps provide incentive programs for people to get into it? My son is a doctor. And they once had a program where they could forgive expenses after a certain number of years. And unfortunately, when about the time he graduated, they ended that. It'd be nice to have programs like that we ought to seriously consider to try and encourage Alaskans in general, but even minorities in the judicial system. If you had any comment on that.
I agree with you. The judicial branch does not control the purse.
Just a quick question. Are there a lot of apps or vacant seats still in the judiciary in Alaska? I mean, are there a lot of positions waiting to be filled, or is it pretty much as it should be?
No. At the Judicial Council is meeting again early November, and we are interviewing people for 2 spots that will become vacant. One will become vacant, I think, on Halloween, and one will be vacant in December. An Anchorage District Court position and a position on the Criminal Court of Appeals. And otherwise, we have, and there's one other vacancy, but otherwise we have all our judges.
Oh, yep.
You mentioned that all your law clerks are here. I was just wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about where they're from, where they went to law school, what brought them here. Just
I'm going to make them my demonstrative exhibit. And Amy's too. All of you stand up.
I was going to hand them the mic. Does anybody want to talk?
Hi, my name is Zoe, and I actually am a UAF alum. I did the Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing here, and I've lived in Fairbanks and Anchorage.
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm originally from Minnesota, wanted to come back to a cold place, but specifically see how law is practiced in state courts that serve a rural state, because I'm from rural Minnesota, but I went to law school in New York City at Columbia, so it's been a big change.
And Jeremiah, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, but I have family that live in Anchorage, and I've always wanted to spend more time with them. And so it's great to be here and to have that opportunity. And yeah, before this, I was in Boston. I was at Harvard.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm from Texas originally. My dad actually worked up on the slope in the 80s in the oil industry, so I thought it'd be cool to come out here. I was clerking for a superior court in Anchorage last year, so had a little experience with the state system, and I think it's pretty good, so.
Hi, I'm Andy. I grew up as an expatriate in the Middle East and went to law school at UC Davis Law. And I'm here because Alaska is known as the court of first impression. It's a place where you see cases that are coming up in this system for the first time. You're able to kind of do these incredible surveys of the 50 states and figure out what makes the best sense for Alaska. Also, I did a second grade project on the Iditarod.
And I think we're going to end with Senator Stevens.
Thank you. So I know you've been involved in We the People. Do you have any thoughts on civics education in Alaska, what we should be doing, what's going on?
I thought We the People was a phenomenal program. What happened here was, one, a particular teacher, Amy Galloway, had the audacity to retire. But she kept it running here after the federal funding expired. It's a civics program that I'm told is based on how congressional hearings run. It is apparently very accurate because my daughter went on to work for Lisa Murkowski and watched the Senate hearing, and she said, "Mom, it's just like We the People." I thought that was a really effective way to get kids exposed to civics. I don't know of other equally effective ways, but I think we have to do it. I don't think people understand. For example, I'm the head of a whole branch of government. There's 3 of us. We're kind of the little one, and as Barb has said a couple times, the quiet one. But we're here, and there's the legislature, and then there's the executive. And that's on purpose. There are 3. We're co-equal, and I don't know that people understand that.
Thank you so much. And it sounds like we need to wrap it up. I also want to put in a plug for civic education. And thank you, Senator Stevens, for being a leader on that issue. It's so important that we help everyone understand the system and what a great system we do have. So thank you so much for being with us this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.